whether it was the success of Udan or the very ambitious proposed sale of Air India, there's been one man who's been leading it from the front. The man who understands the language that markets speak, the man who understands India's macroeconomy rather well. It is my pleasure to welcome the Minister of State for Civil Aviation, Mr. Jayant Sinha, right here on ET Now. Thank you very, very much for being with us. You've really been at the forefront of making a lot of India, at least attempting for them to fly. But let me first talk to you about something that you may not have been very happy about. You have maintained that it was market dynamics and of the aviation industry and the overall market sentiment that that did not find many takers for Air India, and which is why the divestment failed. But don't you think the bidding conditions themselves were a little onerous? You've been in the markets, you've been in this business where deals happen. Could a deal have really happened with the conditions that you put forward?
I think the conditions that we had put forward, Supriya, were very balanced. But to clear a market, the bid-ask spread can't be too wide.
Sure.
If the bid-ask spread is too wide, then the market doesn't clear and obviously we don't move forward. And that's seemingly what happened. We obviously had a few bidders, but they were not particularly enthused about what was on sale. And that's why we didn't get the expressions of interest. We obviously, in this process, don't speak to bidders. It is the transaction advisor that does that. And we did receive a consolidated report from the transaction advisor. And if you step back from the report, what emerges actually is that market conditions and industry dynamics was such that people were not enthused about the offer that was put up for sale. And in fact, if you look at what has been happening in the airline industry over the last 6 months to a year, obviously with oil prices going up, interest rates going up, currency fluctuations, profitability has been hit very hard. And particularly for the full service carriers, profitability has really plunged. So under those circumstances, for them to take on this proposition may have been a tall order. But again, as I said, I cannot speculate as to what the reasons were why people chose to bid or not to bid. It just was obvious that we weren't able to clear the market.
Fair enough, but a very crude comparison has been made on, and I think Jug makes it in the Times of India today, that it's like selling your house but wanting to retain a part of this. Who's going to buy it then? Do you believe one of the conditions that irks, and at least when we spoke to a lot of people, was that they're not comfortable with the government still being on board? You've been in the private sector, you know how people perceive a government nominee on board, and here there'll be two directors by the virtue of having 24% stake. Could there be a relook at that entire proposition?
Supriya, the truth of the matter is that the government has held a passive financial stake in many, many companies, in Axis Bank, in ICICI Bank. The government also held a passive financial stake in Maruti and then exited that completely. In all of those cases, the government has been an exemplary financial investor. And please recognize why we decided to go for the 24% stake. And remember that this 24% stake includes what we would have put into the ESOP. So effectively, the government stake would have probably come down to, let's say, between 18 to 20%.
True.
And therefore, really, it was not about 24%. It was 18 to 20% with an ESOP there as well. And of course, we would have, done whatever any minority shareholder does. But the idea behind retaining that stake was really for your sake, Supriya, for the sake of the people of India. Because the people of India are absorbing a lot of the debt. Because we said we'll keep 25,000 crores debt with the new what we had offered up for sale, but the remainder of the debt would be absorbed by the government of India on behalf of the people of India.
I agree.
And so as the bidder would come in, the bidder would create value in Air India, then some of that financial upside would be shared with the people of India, and the people of India would then be able to pay down the debt. So I think it was a very logical, very rational thing to be done in the national interest, and that's exactly how we described it through the information memorandum, and it was very clear that it was going to be a passive financial stake.
Mr. Sinha, the difference between you and a lot of other people that we speak to from the government is that you understand the way corporate India works, or the way global corporates work. Do you believe, even though you had the best interest at heart of why you wanted to retain the 24% stake, if this is a deal breaker, should this be reviewed?
That is really for the ISAM to do. Supriya, as you know, we have a very senior group of ministers that is evaluating and monitoring the situation. They're looking at all the terms and conditions. And of course, all of that is preceded by a group of joint secretaries and the core group of disinvestment, which is chaired by the cabinet secretary. So whatever is appropriate under the circumstances, this set of decision makers will take that on board and will come to a conclusion on that. But I think for those who were thinking about bidding, they should have been assured that the government's goal in this was a financial goal. There was no other goal. Now, obviously, we can't speak to any other government, and I think that's exactly why we are going to get voted into office again in 2019, because the people trust us. They know that we are going to do what's right for India.
Why did I think you're not going to make a political pitch? Because you will always do that. But I'm going to talk to you about certain sections of the government have also indicated that the government could be considering other options of Air India's strategic divestment. I'm just curious to understand, while you're hopeful of being voted back in, but in your present tenure, you've got just about 9 to 10 odd months in office. What could those other options be?
I'm not going to speculate about those options, nor am I going to speculate on timing, Supriya, because that's really something that has to be decided by these decision makers, by the process that I spoke about, with the joint secretaries, the core group of disinvestment of secretaries, with the cabinet secretary chairing it, and then of course final decisions are made by the Air India specific alternative mechanism, which is chaired by Shri Arun Jaitley ji. So there is a process, there is a set of decision makers. They will do what's right, they will do what's in India's national interest.
Mr. Sinha, I do want to ask you one more question on Air India before I change gears and talk to you about something that's been in the public domain for a while. The Swadeshi Jagran Manch, for one, which is an affiliate of your ideologue, the RSS, has been pushing for an Air India IPO. They believe this is the right way going forward. But what sort of an investor appetite will an IPO have for Air India? I mean, strategic investors could not fill in the gap, the buyer, the purchaser gap. What sort of an interest could an IPO have?
Supriya, obviously, if we were to do a listing, then we would have to make it attractive to the capital markets. We would have to make it attractive to retail investors that anybody with any basic intelligence recognizes. Yes. And in fact, if you go back and you look to history, which is when British Airways and Lufthansa and KLM and Qantas were privatized, that was the process that they followed. So that is a very viable process, and obviously when that process is taken forward, then it has to be done in a way that it is attractive to the capital markets, because we obviously want to be able to go out and place that stock if it is placed to retail investors and institutional investors.
Mr. Sinha, Air India has appealed for additional equity of up to 2,000 crore rupees. Are you open to infusing this kind of money in? Because people will turn back and question, why are you continuing to put in money, and for how long will you continue to do that?
The government is committed to strengthening Air India, providing it whatever necessary financial resources and liquidity is required. And our goal, of course, is to be able to ensure, and this is what we tried to do through the offer for sale process as well, is to ensure that Air India is an independent, globally competitive airline that is owned and operated by Indians. That is what is in our national interest. Please recognize that Air India is not just a company, Supriya. Air India is not just a company, and I say it for two reasons. First, because it is an iconic national asset. It has been, it has really invented the whole airline industry in India, and it has really, as a result of that, won a place in the hearts of Indians. So there is a very iconic quality about Air India, which is why there is all this tremendous interest in Air India. And I also remember the first time I ever flew was in Air India. So, you know, it has that attachment in all of us, an emotional attachment that goes beyond just pure commercial factors. And so in that sense, we wanted to be independent, we want to maintain the brand. The second aspect of it is that Air India, of course, is still playing a vital role for us nationally. It is India's long-haul carrier of choice. It is the only Indian carrier today that is operating wide bodies apart from Jet Airways, and which connects us to all the major cities of the world. That's vitally important, and we need to continue to build on that. For India's further growth and prosperity, we need to have very convenient direct connections to all the major cities, and that has to be true of Delhi, it has to be true of Mumbai, it has to be true of Bangalore, it has to be true of Calcutta, and a variety of other cities in India. That kind of global connectivity is what's required for India to become a global superpower, which of course we have to become. So Air India, and of course a whole host of other private sector airlines as well, will have to provide that connectivity, and that is why Air India is vitally important for us as well.
So let's take a break away from Air India, but Air India isn't the only example. You know, it's replete with BSNL, MTNL, IDBI, some really good brands that have turned toxic, and that raises the big question that why has the government, with the kind of political mandate that you have, failed to failed to leverage the value out of privatizing these companies? I mean, why have you not done that? Why have you not walked the talk on privatization? Why has privatization in NDA 2 been a bad word vis-a-vis NDA 1?
It really is the art of the possible, Supriya. So what we have to find is, we have to see what is it that we can actually undertake and undertake successfully, and what are the mechanisms by which we can do that. Certainly we've tried that with Air India. Air India, please, if you want to take a step back and recognize, is the largest strategic disinvestment ever undertaken in India. Yeah. This is a 25,000 crore company that we are transferring to the private sector, because the private sector will be better at operating an airline than the government is, and the government's resources are better utilized in healthcare, in education, in vital infrastructure, and so on. So obviously we have attempted, we have sought to do it. Of course, as I said, we couldn't clear the market on it. We didn't get an expression of interest. So we have to go back again and think about what is the right way to undertake these very important strategic disinvestment efforts.
So you don't believe privatization is a bad word for you and your government per se? There's been this huge controversy, and I think because it's become a political controversy, it's only fair that I ask you this question. IDBI case, LIC buying 43% stake, has triggered this huge controversy that should, and which is what the Congress alleges, that should you be using insurance money to bail out a toxic asset? What rationale there is to do so?
First of all, the price has to be right, Supriya, and that is a decision that has to be taken by the boards of various companies, right? Yes. And again, we are back to thinking about how markets can clear. And so in the IDBI situation, there is a fiduciary responsibility that both boards have to ensure that if indeed this transaction is undertaken, it is undertaken at a market clearing price. And that is a fiduciary responsibility that the boards have, and I'm sure the boards will fulfill that responsibility. There are many banks that have insurance companies can have banks. So I think that is a perfectly legitimate strategic initiative to undertake. How that will be consummated, what the nature of the transaction is, given the corporate governance framework, given the fiduciary responsibility different institutions have, that only the future can tell.
No, indeed, and I think nobody will dispute the fact, and nobody can disagree with you, that LIC must have a bank. I mean, some of its cousins like an SBI or an ICICI Bank or HDFC have not one but two insurance arms, one in life, one in general. The question that a lot of people are asking is, yes, LIC should have a bank, but why should it be India's worst performing PSU bank? And
again, that is where... But Supriya, I'm somebody who spent his life in the markets, right? It's a function of the price. The price has to be right. There is a price at which you clear markets, right? And so that's, I think, what here the boards of these two institutions are going to have to sort through. What is the market clearing price?
Mr. Sinha, while you were in finance, you looked at the bad bank option very closely. I'll come to that in just a bit, but I think talking about toxic assets, the one that we just spoke about, India's poster boy of bad debt and default, Vijay Mallya, seems to be making this fresh appeal, seems to be putting fresh options on the table and wants to commit repaying every penny that he owes to India's banks. Do you believe he should be given a chance to do so?
These are all sub judice matters now, Supriya. You know, there are a host of investigations underway. So we will have to let the law take its course on this. Obviously, any time that these kinds of matters are being considered, there are offers on all sides, and whoever the responsible competent authorities in this case will have to take that on board. But these are, as I said, very serious criminal matters, investigative matters, and they will have to be dealt appropriately under the legal framework, and whoever, the competent authorities will have to come to their conclusions on that.
But will you agree with me that in the Vijay Mallya case, there are only two choices to be made? Either you make him cough up every penny that he pays and you undo the criminal offences that are obviously leveled against him, or you tell the banks to go take a walk and you go for the juggler and nab the man himself. Will it be an easy... It has to be a political choice that has to be made, is it not?
Then the people who are responsible for making those political choices will make the appropriate political choices. Supriya.
So let me talk to you about the GST. 1 year on, and obviously the government is in a big celebratory mode. The opposition believes it wasn't a very well laid out GST, high rates and all of that. On hindsight, do you believe the government could have done it differently? And now in your present capacity, you're trying to push ATF under the GST. How hopeful are you that this is going to go through?
We are hopeful that ATF will get included in GST. That is the economically right decision to make. We have to get the states on board. The central government obviously has been advocating that all petroleum products come into GST, and of course we have to get the states on board. That's exactly why the constitutional amendment included petroleum products, and so we had set the trajectory for that, and so hopefully we'll get there once the states are on board. But overall, I would say that GST has been outstanding success. Clearly, we are getting up to revenues of 1 lakh crores a month, which is a very robust growth from where we were earlier. We've added 45-50 lakh new indirect taxpayers, which is a stunning growth in the number of indirect taxpayers that we had previously on a consolidated basis between center and state. And I think what has been most remarkable about it is the formalization of the Indian economy that is happening. You're seeing the EPFO numbers. The EPFO numbers in terms of the number of people that are being added to payrolls in a formal way every month is growing. It's showing very strong and robust progress there. People are gradually settling into and using the GST forms and understanding how to do that, and that is making us more competitive, more efficient, and enabling further growth. So GST is a signature reform for this government. Never before in human history has this level of tax reform been attempted in such a large country and implemented so successfully within 1 year. It is an example of what we are able to do.
GST was meant to be a game changer. I'm glad it's at least turning out to be one with its after its initial teething troubles. But the other part of your reform drive has been to clean up India's toxic public sector banks, and the idea of a bad bank seems to be back on the table. This was an idea that you did look at very closely. Do you believe the timing is now right? Because so much water has flown under the bridge. There's now an IBC. Cases are being looked at. People believe, could this add to confusion? Could this add to the multiple layers of cleaning up banks?
I would caution anyone on looking for just one silver bullet.
Okay.
The reality is, when you look at the NPA situation in India, there are a host of different things we have to do. There is a lot of work which we started doing some years ago when I was in the Ministry of Finance, and which has progressed very well, is actually looking to the various sectors themselves and seeing what can be done to heal those sectors and ensure that those sectors are vibrant once again. We've certainly done that in steel. So steel has turned around, and as steel has turned around, obviously the NPA situation has abated there. Similarly, we are looking at what we can do with power assets and what we can do in the power sector. Clearly, there are things we need to do in real estate as well. So we have to look at the underlying sectors and try and improve the health there. That's one thing. Second, we have to obviously get the ARC process to work well and clear the markets that way. Number three, we have to get the insolvency and bankruptcy code working, which has now started to work, and we have to get resolution there. So that's a third thing we can do. Fourth, maybe there are ways in which we can see whether we can create a bad bank, good bank type combination. Actually, in Air India, Supriya, that's exactly what we did. In fact, I brought over my experience from the Ministry of Finance to see whether we can do that in Air India, and maybe we can follow that up with IDBI as well. Because what we did in Air India was we took a whole host of assets, the real estate, all the non-core real estate that is. We took the art and the artifacts, we took some of the debt, we took Centaur Hotels, we took Alliance Air, and several of these assets, and we put them into Air India Asset Holding Company. And that freed up us and enabled us to create a clean, efficient, well-run airline on the other side. So we separated it out. We have now, if you will, the bad bank and the good bank. And that, of course, is something that we think becomes a much more attractive proposition. So that is a fourth thing that we've attempted. So when we look at the situation with NPAs, as I'm saying, let's not just look for one silver bullet. There's a range of options we have to consider, and potentially the bad bank could be also an option that may be worth considering. But again, as I said, the policy makers that are looking at this, the decision makers that are considering this, will obviously take the right decision in the interest of
So two last questions that I want to wrap this up with, and one of the questions actually flows from what you just said, that they have to be, they can't be just one silver bullet. There have to be many options that have to be looked at. But all of this is geared towards one aim, and that aim is to make industry begin investing, to deleverage balance sheets, to clean up banks so that they can begin lending. By when do you think that is going to happen? Because somehow investments are not turning. I mean, what is happening is really in brownfield. The greenfield ones are not really taking off.
No, Supriya, I disagree with that entirely.
Why do you say that?
I disagree with that because you see, every time growth starts, we have a new growth cycle. It is led by new industries, and that's the way any modern day economy works. Today, there are many sectors that are seeing massive investments. We just saw Swiggy getting a large investment right now and becoming the newest entrant to the Unicorn Club. So food delivery is getting huge investments. We just saw the investment of Walmart into Flipkart. That's a massive investment that's happening in logistics, in building out supply chains, in procurement and so on. Rivigo is another unicorn that has now become the largest purchaser of trucks in India. So the investment is happening. The investment is happening.
It's perhaps happening in different sectors.
That's how growth happens. New sectors come up. Aviation is a great example. And you don't see the investment in aviation showing up in the investment numbers because all the planes are leased. We have massive orders of planes happening. We have over 900 planes on order right now. That's billions and billions of dollars. We have lakhs of crores that are being invested in airports as well. So investments are happening. It's just that they may not happen in the sectors that we were looking to previously, because that's looking in the rearview mirror. We have to look out the windshield and see where the growth is happening.
But given the investments and the kind of sectors that are now drawing in investments, is interest rates largely becoming irrelevant now? Because for a Swiggy to raise funds and be a unicorn, it doesn't bother what RBI's interest rates are. Whereas for a steel company to set up a new project, it's relevant. So do you believe high interest rates, a regime that we are entering, a regime that we're perhaps staring at, is largely irrelevant?
Interest rates are obviously important for capital intensive industries, obviously for debt financing, obviously for consumer purchases. Obviously interest rates are important. Perhaps more important are real interest rates, and we have to obviously look at real interest rates. Really, the important question for India now is the real cost of capital going up? Because obviously the kind of policies that the central banks in the developed world, in the OECD countries, the easy money policy, the quantitative easing, everything that they were seeing, that whole paradigm is now shifting around. That really is the change that we're seeing right now. Obviously that will mean significant trends that we have to be careful of in India, because the cost of capital is going to go up, not so much because inflation is going up, but because the entire paradigm itself is shifting.
A quick last question before I let you go. You started off this interview by saying that this was market dynamics that perhaps did not see so much of investor interest. Do you believe some of that market dynamics, some of that sentiment has been marred by questioning of AirAsia, summoning of Tony Fernandez, or is this institutional activism, the kinds that we've seen in the past, once again taking a toll on investments?
Supriya, I can't speculate on why people chose to bid or not bid. I really can't get into that. As I said, the consolidated feedback from the transaction advisor suggests that it was really market circumstances, industry dynamics that inhibited bidding.
On that note, sir, thanks always for speaking to us.